If FDR was right that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, surely there's nothing left for the nation to fear.
What happens frequently is that when big problems go away, smaller ones rise to take up their place. So that when the Cold War went away, instead of people breathing a sigh of relief, what happened was relatively smaller problems rose up. So what seems to happen is we have this catastrophe quota that basically if one catastrophe goes away, then other ones rise to fill the gap, so we're always worried and always have something to fear.
I think we live in about the safest place and the safest times in human history in the U.S. right now. But it often doesn't feel that way, and the reason it doesn't feel that way is because there's so many fears that are promoted by so many different people. I think we have a culture of fear that comes from all sorts of folks and organizations that have real stakes in promoting it, and they benefit from it. So if you start with politicians, they win elections by way of fear-mongering. You move from that to the media. Local TV news is probably the worst offender. The motto there is, if it bleeds, it leads.
Thank you, Lisa. A frightening attack in front of a busload of passengers.
Thanks, Christine. His last day on the job was his last day alive.
Thank you, Mary Beth. A brutal murder caught on tape. Not even witnesses stuck around to help the victim or the detectives.
The culture of fear in the United States is unusual. In fact, extreme, and quite remarkable in a way, because of all the countries in the world, the United States is far and away the most privileged and the most secure.
Alfred Hitchcock was asked, how come he could scare people so silly to the point, wasn't it bad for their health? Hitchcock said, you could watch the birds, but then I turn off the projector and you get to go home, back to real life. But the problem with the way that we've used the news to approximate the way entertainment used to be, we've made the news into a horror movie from which we don't get to go home. I think Hitchcock would be horrified by that. We don't get to turn it off. It's 24/7 now.
The news media delivers round-the-clock fear. They have fears catering to every demographic. The 24-hour news networks fill their lineup with reasons to be afraid.
We're beginning a new series that we're calling Falling Apart. That's because it's about our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, tunnels, our planes, our trains, the tracks they ride on.
Little League batting helmets tainted with lead, and hundreds of thousands of counterfeit circuit breakers that pose a fire hazard.
Tonight, the rice crisis.
This is a genuinely scary time, and we don't know how or when it's going to end.
One of the challenges of living in the 20th and 21st centuries is that we're so aware, because of the mass media, we're so aware of the tragedies going on. Every day you can open up the newspaper and find something to get depressed, upset, angry, disgusted about.
Lou Dobbs is on a crusade to inform people about the war on the middle class and our broken borders.
I mean, Mexico is incompetent, it's corrupt, its government. Right. They encourage their citizens, the least educated, the least skilled of their citizens, the most impoverished, to, as they put it, migrate to this country, to break our laws.
I come for a job. I do cheaper.
There's an army of invaders coming across the border. Apparently, this fear-mongering works because soon after changing format in 2006, Lou Dobbs' ratings went up 33%, far surpassing any other show on CNN. The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer is dedicated to keeping your family safe with video feeds from all over the world. Wolf Blitzer is standing by to let you know all about the terrorist threats, credible or not, that are threatening your family.
You're going to find out right now if you should be worried depending on where you live.
Allah Akbar!
Nancy Grace is there to let people know about the many threats to their family's safety.
Breaking news tonight, double murder in the heartland. 2 schoolgirls brutally murdered off an isolated back road. This case has really struck a chord across the country. They were shot multiple times as if somebody was using them as target practice.
She's always there to remind you that there are bad people out there.
Shot to death. It is absolutely abhorrent. Whoever the killers are walking free tonight.
To Catch a Predator shows people that their kids aren't even safe in their own homes. Their hidden camera special catches would-be predators talking to Chris Hansen.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC, and we're doing a story about adults meeting teens on the internet.
He's there to remind you that your children are never really safe.
Hi, I'm here to pick up your daughter. We have a date? Hey.
America's Most Wanted reminds people that there could be dangerous criminals in their midst. No matter where you are, these dangerous criminals are all around. Only you can help keep your family safe.
50 states, 50 fugitives. You gave us hundreds of tips, and cops started taking them.
Hi. I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but my car has broken down and I need some help.
Just a minute. Send the police. Quick. The Discovery Channel has taken a more educational approach to teaching people what to fear. It Takes a Thief shows people how vulnerable they are to common criminals.
It's been a while, but once upon a time, we were burglars. Now we're here to help law-abiding citizens avoid this.
They're there to make sure you know you're never safe, even in your own home. Fox News has a more consistent message. They offer round-the-clock coverage of the biggest threat facing America: liberals.
This is what my fear is. I don't believe America knows the real Barack Obama.
Not just because he's a radical, not just because he's a Democrat.
Some of what we fear that it means is
he going to be someone who's a patsy for the left and for union?
It's a scary prospect.
America will become Venezuela.
Spread the wealth around.
That is socialism.
And that's what scares me most about Senator Obama.
These radical associations of 20 years.
The coming liberal storm.
The far left kooks. Is he going to try and silence talk radio?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but you have to take your shoes off.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding, sir.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Children are our future, and there's an overwhelming desire to protect them from threats, even when they aren't really there. For years, there were rumors of evil people putting blades or poison in Halloween candy they gave to children.
Happy Halloween!
Thank you.
A survey from 1985 showed that 60% of parents were concerned about the safety of their kids' candy. Concerned parents carefully checked the candy to make sure it was safe. Some overly paranoid people even went out and bought new candy they knew was safe. The problem is that there really wasn't an epidemic of tainted treats. In fact, only one child ever actually died from poisoned candy, and he was poisoned by his father to claim life insurance money. A slightly less absurd overreaction parents are prone to is various health pandemics.
We're a very frightened society. We're afraid of illness. We're afraid of the drugs that treat the illness. We're afraid of the vaccines that prevent the illness.
Parents regularly race to their doctor to make sure their child is immunized against the latest virus.
The one you love could be carrying cold and flu viruses. Fact, the flu virus can live on surfaces for days.
This is how meningococcal meningitis can look, just 24 hours before it claims a child's life.
Timeline: 2001 anthrax, 2002 smallpox, 2003 SARS, 2004 influenza, 2005 mad cow disease, 2006 bird flu, 2006/2007 spinach E. coli, the mysterious unseen E. coli. All of these things are true killers. Like any fiction, it's based on fact. These are true killers, but our perception of what our personal risk from them is beyond the risk.
It seems like everything is a threat to our children's safety.
Let's face it, I'm all about protecting kids. If you watch the show, you know that's where I'm coming from. We have 3 sex with my teacher stories in one day. Let's break them down for you one by one.
You've heard the old nursery rhyme, good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. Bed bugs are invading bedrooms across America.
How bad is the problem of bed bugs in this country?
I would say it's spinning out of control.
But the biggest threat to our children is sexual predators. These deviant pedophiles are stalking our children. Apparently, they're hiding out at the schools, parks, and malls. They've even made use of the latest technology, the internet.
So just how safe are our children? Could a stranger lure your child away?
Have you spent time thoroughly teaching your family how to protect themselves against abduction? And do you even know what to teach them?
He's 32, she's just 16. A Riverside man is accused of using MySpace to lure a teenage girl into a sexual encounter.
This program should help with child abduction, but what about sexual molestation or child abuse? How should you respond if you think your child has been victimized?
From the heartland to the halls of Congress, our series of investigations into computer sex predators has raised concerns about the exploitation of children on the internet.
Sexual predators and con men have found their way into the internet. They'll find their way into the virtual reality too.
There are so many dangers that we must protect our kids from. Injury and illness, drugs and gangs. The list is frightening and it is long. One threat haunts us more than all the others, the threat of sexual predators. Every day, children are sexually solicited online. Every day, thousands of individuals obtain, distribute, and produce child pornography over the internet.
Luckily, there are crusaders out there conducting stings to keep our children safe and, of course, get ratings.
But the question was how to go about reporting on this crime and exposing the men who might be inclined to commit it.
You're naked, there's a 14-year-old girl, you're chasing a cat around, you've got Cool Whip.
Is that a scare tactic? Of course it's a scare tactic.
It turns out random child abductions and molestations are very rare.
The myth of the missing children is something that really took off in the early 1980s. And many people claimed that thousands, if not millions, of children were being abducted by strangers every year, and they were being sexually assaulted, brutalized, if not killed, and in many cases went missing altogether. What we found out, of course, in the research is that most missing children in the country were runaways. The second largest chunk of these children were parental abductions taken by parents in custody disputes, divorce battles. And most of these children were not harmed physically. Most, in fact, in terms of runaways, returned home within 3 to 4 or 5 days.
I've been on 18 years. I've in my entire career, never worked a stranger abduction kidnapping. And that's 5 years in homicide, not one kidnapping where a total stranger abducted, say, a kid off the street. For a child walking down the street, it's very safe. You know, particularly this area here, just doesn't happen. Kids are not kidnapped by strangers.
When you watch American TV, what you find is lots of scary stories, lots of scary shows. Some of them are fine. If it's fiction, drama, and it's portrayed as such, that's great. The problem comes when it's portrayed as reality, or even more importantly, when it's portrayed as news and dangers are being blown way out of proportion. So this goes there's this whole range from shows like America's Most Wanted that are just all about scaring us about all kinds of typically very low probability dangers, to news programs. Ranging from local news, which is about the worst offender, to cable news channels that get on all kinds of kicks. So periodically, predictably, there will be rampant scares about kidnapped children, and they'll all follow on each other. And if you look at it, you find these every few years, basically, sometimes more often, where you can't turn on the cable TV news without hearing about kidnapped children. It sounds like if your child walks outside and you don't watch them for 5 minutes, they'll be kidnapped off the street by a stranger. when in fact that's about the last thing that a parent needs to worry about. They might worry about whether the child's going to run in the street, and that, that kind of realistic danger. But this other thing just gets blown way out of proportion by these shows.
Over 80% of child molesters know the victims. They're usually either family members or friends of the family. But as happens so often, people are afraid of the wrong thing. Megan's Law was passed so parents can check their neighborhood to see if there's any sexual predators nearby, all the while overlooking the threat within. The problem with this misdirection is that the real threats to children are overlooked. Organizations dealing with the most pressing threats have to compete with those publicizing the most sensational threats. Each year, 68,000 children are rushed to the emergency room because of accidental poisoning. Over 5,000 children die every year in preventable accidents. Very few children die at the hands of murderers. But organizations like Safe Kids have a hard time competing against eye-catching stings. It's hard to compete with laws named after children. There's Megan's Law, Sarah's Law, Jessica's Law. Opposing these laws is like opposing the memories of the children themselves, even if the tragedy these laws are trying to prevent are relatively rare. Unfortunately, but as so often happens, we are afraid of the wrong things. Based on the news, people are often afraid of random acts of violence.
An Orange County family is mourning a 13-year-old boy who decided to visit some friends in another neighborhood and was killed in a confrontation with suspected gang members.
The coverage always emphasizes the exceptions. It might show up several months later when another event is talked about, and these things will be put together. They might have occurred months apart, maybe even years apart, but visually they'll be put together, and we'll see these as very typical and common.
The stories that have legs that run quite a bit, that get a lot of coverage, are the ones that are unusual. You know, you can have drug dealers killing themselves all week long, or gang members shooting themselves, and it just doesn't get coverage. You know, it doesn't make the papers. It might make the papers, but it surely won't make television news. If you have an attractive white female murdered, you'll get tons of media coverage, and people will come from all over the country to cover that story. It does give you kind of a skewed...
9 out of 10 homicides are committed by someone the victim knows. Most violent crimes occur between husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends. So don't keep a gun in your house to protect your family from intruders. Get the gun out of your house to protect yourself from your partner. But people are still afraid of random acts of violence. They want to protect themselves from the unknown.
I think what we have to keep in mind is a couple of questions. Are we hearing isolated incidents that are being portrayed as if they were trends, general trends? So when you hear that there's some big new scary phenomenon out there, whatever it is, some new drug, some new form of crime, some new foreign scare, the question to ask is, am I hearing a bunch of little stories that are really isolated incidents and being told that it's a big new trend, or is there really a new trend? I think the other thing we have to ask always is, who's benefiting from this? Is the promotion of this scare benefiting someone's election campaign, somebody's bottom line, or some company's bottom line, or some advocacy group's membership campaign? And if it is, we should be very cautious.
Every 15 seconds, a burglary takes place in the United States. Help protect your family with a fast alarm response of ADT.
What'd you forget now?
Hello?
This is Chris from Brinks Home Security. Are you all right?
Someone just tried to break in. The alarm scared them off.
Black men tend to be the focus of scare campaigns for centuries already in the U.S. African American men, that scare just persists. But then it varies. Certain sorts of immigrants, one immigrant wave after another. If you look back in history, it was the Irish for a while. Obviously, the Irish don't particularly scare people these days.
The criminals are coming. There's the black man, And there are illegal immigrants.
The fear of immigrants goes way back in American history. I mean, there's been constant fear and anger about new arrivals. It's a society of immigrants, of course, but each wave of immigrants had a tough time when they came in. But once they were here, they didn't want others to come in.
I would venture to guess that if people want to be intellectually honest, and people are going to say that poverty causes
ni nada para que ellos nos traten así o algo. Nada más queremos trabajar y estar bien aquí.
If a poor, uneducated, hungry, starving, lacking proper clothing, illegal alien from Mexico can cross the border, I'm sure a highly trained, well-funded terrorist can as well. So.
Illegal immigrants are the best scapegoats. They combine all our fears into one. Because they came here illegally, they are by definition criminals. Some of them are in gangs, some of them smuggle drugs, and maybe some of them even like to molest children. Every new group of immigrants coming into America has been feared. The Irish were locked out. The Japanese were locked up. The fear of outsiders is one of the easiest ways to distract the populace from the real problems of the country.
America did not become a great nation through scapegoating. We have enabled assimilation of so many groups from around the world. But when we start to look at those people in our country and begin to evoke them as out groups, we set the stage for our own disintegration. The first motto of the United States, E pluribus unum, out of many one, speaks to the self-conscious principles of unity that help to create a nation. And so we need to remember where we came from.
One of the things we saw after September 11th was an effort to find scapegoats. And what scapegoats are people or groups that we can see as evil and blame for our problems.
There's a long tradition of this in the United States. The non-citizen has always been the most vulnerable to politically repressive fear, because the non-citizen is essentially a being without rights. The politically repressive kinds of fear that has been mobilized since 9/11 has really been leveraged and targeted at a specific group, Muslim and Arab Americans, particularly those Muslim and Arab Americans who happen to be immigrants and non-citizens.
The way to make people afraid is with mystery, with unknown. Someone that's unlike you, someone that doesn't look like you, someone that may not be thinking like you. Nothing like a cave dweller, with a different colored skin that you ought to be afraid of. That's going to come over from the other side of the ocean and wipe you out.
We've got to bring a government in Mexico to justice, because they are the obscene source of just too much. Whether it is the preponderance of methamphetamines, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana entering this country, or whether it is the violence raging along our border. Mexico remains the principal source of all of this country's heroin, marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamines, and that has not changed one iota.
One of the most pressing fears is that of drugs. There's an unprecedented epidemic of drug abuse that must be addressed. In 1989, America was reminded how important the war on drugs was. President George Bush addressed the country on a somber note.
This is the first time since taking the oath of office that I felt an issue was so important, so threatening, that it warranted talking directly with you, the American people. All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs. Drugs have strained our faith in our system of justice. Our courts, our prisons, our legal system are stretched to the breaking point. The social costs of drugs are mounting. In short, drugs are sapping our strength as a nation. This is crack cocaine. Seized.
Come on, let's go.
Scares about drug use cycle through American culture often, periodically, because they're great for politicians, they're great for the media. And the way it typically works is it will be a focus on a category of drugs that actually is far from the most prevalent danger.
Fear of illicit drugs is, again, a unique, almost unique U.S. phenomenon, and it is created There are regular drug wars, which are designed to frighten the population into terror of drugs. Those who are running the wars, the government, know perfectly well that of course there's a drug problem, but they know perfectly well that the way to deal with the drug problem, if you care about it, is prevention and treatment and education. But it's much more effective to stir up hysteria in the population.
And thus began the next greatest fear: drugs.
I'm still drinking.
That's a good feeling. It's a false feeling. You're looking at jail time anywhere from a year to 25 or 30. When it comes to drugs, friendship stops. It's a temptation. It's the forbidden fruit.
As so often happens with hyped-up fears, people become afraid of the wrong things. Parents search their kids for crack cocaine and heroin. But the real epidemic was happening under their noses and in their medicine cabinets. Abuse of prescription drugs flourished as the public was misdirected.
The most common drug use in the U.S. by a long shot is prescription drug use, but we very seldom get national scares about that because who's going to benefit from it, right? Who's going to really promote it? And there are lots of people who would, and companies and so forth, who prefer not to focus on that. So you get some obscure, quote-unquote, new drug that there's a scare about.
We were fighting a war on drugs and didn't have time to question who our enemy was. We weren't fighting the pharmaceutical companies. We were fighting the drug cartels, drug smugglers, and of course, the terrorists. In 2001, just a few months after September 11, George W. Bush addressed the country.
Murder families in Colombia.
It was just innocent fun.
I help kidnap people's dads. Hey, some harmless fun.
I help kids learn how to kill.
I was just having some fun, you know. I helped kill policemen.
I was just having fun.
I helped the bomber get a fake passport.
All the kids do it. I helped kill a judge. I helped blow up buildings. My life, my body. It's not like I was hurting anybody else.
It's just that simple. Drugs support terrorism, and buying drugs supports terrorists. With this latest fear of terrorism, all of our fears could be tied together. Terrorists are criminals. They sell drugs to our children, and they're even immigrants. There's just one problem. It's not true. The argument was that since the Taliban supported itself in part by producing poppies that could be made into heroin, drugs supported terrorism. But very few people use heroin. The most commonly abused drugs in America were marijuana and prescription drugs. But once again, logic wouldn't stand in the way of a great speech and a new war. We were fighting a war on terrorism and didn't have time to question who our enemy really was. The war on drugs gave way to the war on terror. We had a new war. We had new heroes. We had new victims. And we had a new villain. Osama bin Laden was an almost mythical evildoer. Unlike child predators, drug dealers, and other criminals, he actually addressed the American public periodically to let everyone know they should still be afraid.
We know that he's a terrorist, Osama bin Laden. He's got a new message out for us tonight. And black women and their hair. Very touchy, very sensitive. Now it's a lawsuit. We're going to bring it out in the open.
And if we weren't scared enough, we were told that the messages from Osama bin Laden might have hidden messages in them. If death to America is the overt message, what could possibly be the hidden message?
Bin Laden has made it very clear that what he hopes for is overreaction and fear. In 2004, Osama bin Laden sent out a message indicating that it's really easy to provoke these birds. All we have to do is have somebody wave a flag that says Al-Qaeda on it, and they send the military there, and it costs them billions, and it costs us practically nothing. He also talked after 9/11 about fear. He said fear is gripping the United States from west to east, from north to south. Thank God for that. So terrorists basically can't do a whole lot just in their direct effects. What they're frequently looking for is reaction and fear, and the big payoff from their standpoint comes from that.
Terrorists know how to get the biggest bang for their buck. They know how to scare a whole society silly while blowing up 2 buildings. They know how to attack the centers of fear. That's why terrorists are experts at fear, not of bombs. It's not a matter of how many people you can kill. It's a matter of how many people you can scare into thinking they're going to be killed. That's how you get control, and that's how you get attention.
2 years ago, Osama bin Laden warned the American people, quote, "Operations are under preparation, and you will see them on your own ground once they are finished." All of us, particularly those charged with protecting the American people, need to take the words of this enemy very seriously, and I know you do.
So bin Laden says jump, and we do. It makes one wonder if bin Laden might be lying just to keep us in a state of terror. There were even virtual terrorists roaming the web.
Press reports suggest that Islamic militants are using programs like Second Life to transfer money, build online communities, and win new recruits. Radicals may also be responsible for virtual terrorist attacks in which buildings depicted on the website are blown up.
There's been a tendency, though it's somewhat declining, to issue these big threats about there's going to be an attack any minute now.
Over the last several days, our intelligence and law enforcement agencies have seen an increased volume and level of activity involving threats of terrorist attacks. The information we have does not point to any specific target, either in America or abroad. In the
alerts, they ranged from buy duct tape to kiss your ass goodbye. This was the perfect tool to keep the public afraid of vague threats.
Again, I emphasize this perhaps to my own peril, but again, the threats we are picking up are very generic. They warn of more attacks, but are not specific about where or what type.
So, in other words, be afraid. Be very afraid.
All these things.
Yet it is so isolated, it impacts few. This fear of terrorism has given people a false sense of danger. They are afraid of the wrong things.
How much damage could terrorists do if they attacked a factory or even a research library that deals with deadly chemicals?
Take off your shoes, strip off your belt, and take out your laptop.
We're here to protect the United States. We're here to prevent terrorists and weapons of mass destruction.
Some travelers will be asked to step into a body scanning machine.
Terrorists will attack somewhere in the world within the next 5 years using biological or nuclear weapons.
The title of the Commission's report says it all: World at Risk.
Weapons of mass destruction could possibly cause 10 or 100 times the deaths seen on 9/11.
The risks are growing, and America's margin of safety is shrinking.
Many more lives could be saved if our military, law enforcement, and Homeland Security tried to protect us from the real threats. According to the Centers for Disease Control, terrorism is one of the most unlikely ways to die. Let's put terrorism in perspective. 1 in every 5 deaths in America is a result of smoking-related illnesses.
Put the cigarette down.
1 in every 5 deaths is a result of heart disease.
May I take your order?
You have a 1% chance of dying while driving a car.
Watch out for that car.
Thanks.
More people die every year by drowning in bathtubs.
Are you all right in there?
I'm fine.
Just checking.
More people die every year from falling off a chair. You have a greater chance of dying in a toaster oven accident.
It's ready.
It's more likely you'll be attacked by a shark, but even that's rare. More people die by falling into holes and tunnels that children dig in the sand than in shark attacks.
In Isle of Palm, South Carolina, the long arm of the law might soon reach right into your beach bag. According to the local paper, there's a proposal to charge a fine of up to $500 for all those folks who don't flatten their sandcastles or fill in the holes they leave behind. Police say the holes especially create a hazard. People have fallen, they've been badly injured, but one beachcomber told the local paper, quote, "Someone has too much time on their hands."
And finally, it is more likely to be killed by an asteroid than a terrorist attack in America.
If you include 9/11 and assume that such things
can or will repeat. The probability of you in the United States being involved in a terrorist attack is really very small. The intrinsic chance of death by asteroid was in the same ballpark.
The federal government is spending hundreds of billions of dollars trying to keep us safe from terrorism. Since it's actually more likely to be killed by an asteroid, should we be spending even more money protecting ourselves from that?
This just in. A group of protesters is picketing at the airport requesting more funding to protect America from asteroids.
So sometimes you wonder, really, who are the terrorists?
It's interesting that this threat of terrorism seems to bother people and concern people so much more than things that are far more likely to kill them. There's a number of explanations for that, but I think one important one is that we tend to be afraid of things that are very salient, very vivid, and that seem uncontrollable. So when 9/11 occurred, it was sort of introducing this new threat of death in a very, very obviously vivid and salient way.
FEMA and many other government departments were put under the Department of Homeland Security. They were focused primarily on terrorism and were unprepared to handle a natural disaster.
It's a disaster. There's still a lot of people on the rooftops from what we hear running out of food and water. So we're just trying to get out here and do what we can do.
After 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security, which is dealing both with terrorism, which hasn't happened, and hurricanes, which obviously do and will continue to, spent a huge amount of money on first responders to terrorism, and very little on first responders to hurricanes. So this distorted emphasis seems to have been very extensive.
There are many hurricanes every year, but one isolated terrorist attack took center stage in emergency planning. A perfect illustration for where the real focus of Homeland Security came only a month later during Hurricane Rita. Nearly 1,300 patients near Beaumont, Texas were supposed to be airlifted to safety. But the Transportation Safety Administration, another part of Homeland Security, delayed the evacuation. They insisted that every wheelchair-bound patient be screened with a metal detector. They were scared of the wrong thing. There was a hurricane that would hit in a matter of hours, but they were more concerned with the remote possibility that one of the handicapped patients was a terrorist.
Since September of 2001, we provided...
This just in. The world is dangerous. There are criminals on the loose. There's terrorists that want to kill you. Immigrants are invading your country. There's new viruses and new drugs. Your children are in danger. The world is ending soon. You will die.
There's no conspiracy. The primary reason for propagating the culture of fear is justification for existence. The Crusaders for Children's Rights support themselves with parents' fears. The advocates for immigration reform build their ratings by pandering to their audience. Law enforcement secures funding by reminding us they are our last line of defense. The media keeps us watching by reminding us how dangerous life is. The anti-terrorism industry keeps tax dollars heading their way by reminding us the world is a dangerous place. And our leaders stay in power by making sure we know there are people out there that intend to do us harm. The only way to defeat terror is to no longer fear it. What will we fear next? What new threat will we find endangers our children? What new pandemic will threaten civilization? What new drug will hit the streets? What new group of immigrants will invade our country? What new enemy will we all rally against?
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight.
Dum-dum, beetle-dum-dum, 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 beetle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and the turtle was very alert. When danger
sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people. Please? Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?